Hey Central students, welcome to another shop video. You know, I looked around and there's a lot of videos on YouTube about how to take apart an old lawnmower engine or a Briggs and Stratton engine, but none of them showed it exactly the way that I want you to do it in class. So I just thought that I'd make my own video. So here we are, we're going to take apart a Briggs and Stratton 4-stroke engine.
For our purpose, for what we're going to take apart, we're only going to need a socket wrench, a spark plug wrench, a 7/16 and a 1/2 inch socket, a 7/16 and 1/2 inch combination wrench, a torque wrench, and a slot screwdriver. The first thing to do is to test whether our motor has spark. Pull off the high tension lead and place it so it's about 1/2 centimeter away from the end of the spark plug. If you can't get it to stay in that position, you can hold it with the screwdriver. I'd recommend against holding it with your fingers, or you might be in for a little shock. We can see a spark jumping from the high tension lead to the spark plug. As you pull the pull cord, you should notice some resistance. Thunk, 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 thunk. That is the compression of the piston in the cylinder. We're going to go ahead and remove the spark plug, and that compression should disappear. Take the socket wrench, put on the spark plug socket, make sure it's on off, put it over top of the spark plug, loosen, and then undo with your fingers. Place it in the parts tray, and pull the pull cord again. It should be much easier to pull now because the compression is just coming out the spark plug hole. Next, we're going to remove the flywheel cover that has the pull starter as part of it. There's 3 bolts for that. The bolts are here on the top, on the side, oh, it's missing one, and on the other side, right there. They're 7/16 inch bolts. Let's go.
There we go.
Underneath the flywheel cover, we have the flywheel here that is heavy, and it provides inertia for the engine to keep it rotating, and it has fins on it to blow air across the air-cooled crankcase. And we have the coil. The coil has some contact points very close to the flywheel. The flywheel has magnets built into it, and that is what generates the electrical current necessary to create the spark. This motor generates its own electricity. It doesn't have an outside battery. Next, we're going to remove the air filter using our slot screwdriver. You can check the condition of the air filter foam by opening it up, looking at the bottom, and go in the parts tray. Now we'll take a look inside the carburetor. This is the carburetor, which controls the air-fuel mixture going into the engine. This lever here is called the choke. If I pull the choke, you can see what happens. It closes off the entrance of air into the carburetor. By pulling the choke when the engine is cold, it allows the air-fuel mixture to be richer, to have a higher percentage of gasoline in it as compared to air. This allows it to start quickly, and then once the motor is running and warm, you would close the choke to allow more air in so that the motor runs more efficiently using less gas. This part here is the throttle. By opening and closing that, it sucks more or less air-fuel mixture into the engine and speeds it up or slows it down. Next, we'll be removing the cylinder head. There are 8 bolts holding the cylinder head down, and these have to be undone and done up in a specific order. We don't want to just undo one side all at once, otherwise we could potentially warp the head slightly. So we're going to undo them in the order listed on your sheet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're going to undo them all slightly, and then once they're loose, we can take them all out completely. When we put the cylinder head back on, we're going to do it in the reverse order, and then we're going to use the torque wrench to tighten them up to a specific tightness. Use the socket wrench with a 1/2 inch socket. Using the template you created by tracing the head gasket, take the bolts out and place them in the cardboard. This will ensure that when you are putting the bolts back together, they go back into the same holes that they were removed from. Put this in your parts tray. You can remove this little piece. You can now take the cylinder head off. If it doesn't come off, take the slot screwdriver and just place it in here and give it a little twist. And there we go. You can now see the exposed piston and valves. Looking at the valves, we can notice a few different things. First, this is the intake valve. It's slightly larger than the exhaust valve, and you can usually tell the difference because the exhaust valve will tend to be a little blackened and burned because that's where the exhaust is traveling past. The other way you can tell is that the intake valve is lined up with the carburetor. This is where the carburetor comes in through the intake valve. The exhaust valve is lined up with the muffler. That is where the exhaust goes out. And now we're going to run through the 4 strokes of the 4-stroke engine. Each stroke is either an up or a down motion. At the very beginning of the cycle, both valves are closed. The first stroke is the intake stroke. As we turn the motor, the intake valve will open and the piston will begin to go down as it sucks in the air-fuel mixture. At the bottom of this stroke, the intake valve will close and the piston will rise. This is the compression stroke. It is compressing the air-fuel mixture in the cylinder. At the top of this stroke, the spark plug will fire, igniting the air-fuel mixture, and this is the power stroke. Both valves are closed to seal in the energy, and the piston is forced downward by the explosion. At the bottom of this stroke, the exhaust valve will open, the piston will rise, pushing out the exhaust, and we'll start all over again. Let's go through that quickly. Intake. Intake valve is open, piston going down. Compression, both valves closed, piston coming up. Power, both valves closed, piston going down. Exhaust, exhaust valve open, piston coming up. Now if you can imagine, your average motor is doing this hundreds, if not thousands of times per second. Next, we will be opening up the crankcase and seeing what goes on inside there. The crankcase is accessed by removing 6 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're going to place those bolts in our cardboard carrier in the 6 holes that we've made. Use either the 7/16 inch socket or 7/16 combination wrench to remove these bolts. After you've removed all 6 bolts, just double check that the motor has been drained of oil by opening up the oil filler cap on the side and dipping your finger in. It should be completely dry. Now I know that these motors have been drained, but it's a good idea just to double check, because if not, you're in for a big mess. If you try to just pull the cover off, this one came off easily. If you can't quite get it off, you can just tap the back of the cover with the plastic hand of the screwdriver and it should come right off. Hopefully the gasket remains intact. It's usually fused to the outside of the cover. Place this in your parts tray. Let's take a look at what we've got inside. When we open the crankcase, we notice a few things. This is the crankshaft that was sticking out of the cover, and it has a gear attached to it, and then there's another larger gear here. This is called the camshaft. The camshaft is what opens and closes the valves. See if you can think about how much bigger the camshaft is than the crankshaft gear based on the fact that it's a 4-stroke engine. I'll give you a couple minutes. Figure it out yet? Well, if you think about it, each valve opens and closes only once during the 4 strokes, yet the crankshaft rotates 2 full rotations, which means that the camshaft gear is exactly double the size of the crankshaft gear. For every 1 rotation of the camshaft, the crankshaft will go around twice. Also in here, we can see the piston connecting rod. This piece here, that goes up into the cylinder and it's connected to the piston. That is connected through this cap here onto the crankshaft, and that is what makes the up and down energy of the piston turned into the rotational energy of the crankshaft. So as I rotate the crankshaft, you can see that connecting rod going up and down. There it goes down and around and back up. These motors also have an old style oil spreader that's attached to the bottom of the connecting rod. This goes in and out of the oil and it spreads oil all around inside the crankcase. Now we're going to remove the camshaft. In order to be able to easily remove the camshaft, you have to make sure that both valves are closed. If there's pressure on the camshaft because one of the valves is open, it's going to be much more difficult to remove. So I'll turn the motor until that valve closes, and then come back down and just pull out the camshaft. Almost always when you pull it out, the valve tappets fall out. Try to figure out which one came out of which hole. That's the back, that's the front, and hang on to those. Next, we're going to remove the 2 connecting rod and bolts there. You may not be able to do this with a socket wrench. You might need to use the combination wrench to be able to reach it in there. We've taken the bolts out and the oil spreader, keeping them one side and the other. There's the end cap. If the end cap doesn't fall right off, you should just be able to just tap it with the end of the screwdriver and it should come off. And now the piston connecting rod is right there, and if we just push that, we should be able to push the piston up and out the top of the cylinder. Let's take a look. There's the piston, and up it comes, and there it is. And we can just pull that out, and we'll clean that off. At this point, you're finished as much of the dismantling as we're going to do in this class. We're going to start putting things back together. Before we put the piston back in, we're just going to take a little bit of oil and a paintbrush and just brush some oil on the inside of the cylinder. Since we're not running any oil in these engines, this will help the next group still be able to pull the pull starter to have the engine turn over. You may notice that when you try to put the piston back in, it doesn't want to go all the way down. These piston rings need to be compressed so that it fits nice and snug within the cylinder. So we're going to use our handy dandy homemade piston ring compressor, which is basically just a piece of sheet metal and a hose clamp. With our piston rings compressed, we're going to place that into the cylinder. We're just going to take a little piece of wood and a mallet and just tap on the top of that. As soon as it's in, that will just fall off. Good. Now we just need to line up the connecting rod with the correct spot on the crankshaft. Push down on the piston. And then we're going to put our end cap back on with our 2 bolts and our oil spreader. This part here is probably the most difficult part of the reassembly. Putting in the camshaft and the valve tappets. If you look on the crankshaft, there should be a mark. These ones have a little line here, and on the camshaft, there's a little circle right there. That gear needs to line up, that groove where the circle is needs to line up with that mark there as we put it in, and we also have to keep the valve tappets in at the same time. So, you sort of have to hold the tappets with your finger and then put the camshaft in, holding the tappets as you go. Here's what I mean. Tappets go back in, 1, 2. Hold with your finger. Use the camshaft to hold them while you slide the camshaft back. Make sure that the timing mark is in the right place and slide the back of the camshaft into the slot. Like that. And there's a close-up view showing the timing marks lining up. At this point, we're going to put the crankcase cover back on. And reinstall the 6 bolts. Now we're going to reinstall our cylinder head. If this was a real rebuild, we would scrape off the old gasket and install a new one. But I'm just going to put the old gasket back in place. Our cylinder head goes on. Oops. And then we put our bolts back in the same order that we took them out. Like that. Back into the same locations. Now that you've got them all finger tight, just make sure they're all snug with the wrench. I'm not putting any pressure on them at all. I'm just making sure they're snugged down. And then we're going to use the torque wrench. We'll take our socket off here. We'll take our torque wrench and attach the socket. We're going for 140 inch-pounds. Inch-pounds is here. We want the meter to move to there. Let's take a look how that works. We're going to start out going in our order, and we're going to go to about 50. There. And then we'll do the next one. Whoops. And we'll go to about 50. And then we'll do all the other ones to 50 in the correct order. On the second pass, we'll go up to the full 140. I'm on bolt number 1. There we go. Hold the motor, push, 140. And I'll move around and do my order as I'm meant to. Now that the cylinder head has been done, we can go ahead and replace the air filter. Do that one up. Snug it up with the screwdriver. And we're on to the flywheel cover and pull starter. Replace the spark plug. Twist it until it's finger tight. Snug it up with the wrench, not too tight, and reattach the high tension lead. And we're done.